It started as a spontaneous idea. Four best friends, Emily, Jack, Sarah, and Mike, had been planning a getaway for weeks. Their lives had become routine, and they needed a break from the monotony. Scrolling through an online rental site, Sarah stumbled upon a gorgeous villa nestled on a hill just outside of town. The pictures showed an old yet charming stone house with a large yard, beautiful views of the countryside, and an inviting swimming pool. The price was surprisingly low, but they didn't think twice. They were more focused on the break they so desperately needed. "I can't believe we got this place for such a steal," Jack commented as they drove up the winding road that led to the villa. "Maybe the owner doesn't care about money and just wants people to enjoy it," Mike suggested, his optimism contagious. They arrived at the villa just before sunset. The sky was ablaze with shades of orange and red, casting an eerie glow over the property. The air was still, almost too still, as they unloaded their bags. "Doesn't look like anyone's been here in ages," Emily remarked, glancing around at the overgrown garden. "That just means we'll have the whole place to ourselves," Sarah said, grinning. Inside, the villa was even more stunning than the photos. Old rustic furniture gave it a warm, cozy feel. The friends immediately felt at home. They spent the evening cooking dinner, laughing and reminiscing about old times. As night fell, the air grew colder and the wind outside picked up, howling through the trees. They settled in the living room, sipping wine by the fireplace. The flames crackled, casting flickering shadows on the walls. "This place is perfect," Emily sighed, feeling the stress of the past few weeks melt away. But as the night wore on, a strange tension began to creep into the atmosphere. The lights occasionally flickered, and they heard what sounded like footsteps outside, though every time they checked, no one was there. "Probably just animals," Mike said, trying to brush it off, though his tone betrayed his unease. At around midnight, they decided to call it a night. The villa had 3 bedrooms, so Emily and Sarah shared one, while Jack and Mike took the other 2. Exhausted from the day, they fell asleep almost immediately. But in the dead of night, Emily woke with a start. Something felt off. She glanced around the room, her heart pounding. Sarah was gone. "Sarah?" she whispered, but there was no response. Emily slipped out of bed, her bare feet cold against the wooden floor. She opened the door and stepped into the hallway, which was dimly lit by the moonlight streaming through a window. "Sarah?" She called out, louder this time. Silence. She moved towards Sarah's door, her heartbeat echoing in her ears. Slowly, she pushed the door open and peered inside. The room was empty. The bed was neatly made, as if Sarah had never been there. Fear gripped her. She ran to Mike's room and knocked frantically. When there was no answer, she pushed the door open. The bed was empty, too. Panic rising, she hurried to Jack's room, only to find it vacant as well. "Jack? Mike? Where are you?" she shouted, but her voice was swallowed by the oppressive silence of the villa. Emily raced down the stairs, her breath quickening. The living room was empty, the fireplace now nothing but embers. She grabbed her phone, but there was no signal. Suddenly, she heard a noise from outside, a faint rustling, like something or someone moving through the bushes. Desperate, she ran to the front door and yanked it open. The cold night air hit her, and she stepped outside, her eyes scanning the dark, shadowy yard. That's when she saw it. Near the edge of the garden, something or someone was dragging a large, heavy object towards the woods. The object was covered by a dark cloth, but Emily could see the outline of a body underneath. "No!" she screamed, instinctively running towards it. As she got closer, the figure dragging the object turned to face her. It was a man, his face obscured by a hood, but his eyes were visible, cold, dead eyes that locked onto hers. In that moment, Emily knew she was in the presence of something truly evil. She turned to run back to the villa, but before she could take a step, something hard and heavy struck the back of her head. The world went dark. Emily woke up in a small, dimly lit room. Her hands were bound, and she was lying on a cold metal table. The air was thick with the stench of blood and chemicals. Panic surged through her as she tried to move, but her body felt weak and sluggish. Suddenly, the door creaked open, and the man with the dead eyes entered the room. In his hand, he held a scalpel. He approached her slowly, savoring the fear in her eyes. "I've been doing this for years," he whispered, his voice low and chilling. "No one ever escapes." But just as he was about to make the first cut, a loud crash echoed from somewhere in the villa. The man froze, his head snapping towards the door. Someone had broken in. Emily's heart pounded. Was it the police? Had someone found them? The man cursed under his breath and moved to the door, leaving it slightly ajar as he slipped out to investigate. Emily seized the moment, adrenaline surging through her. She managed to free one of her hands and then the other. Her body screamed in pain, but she forced herself to sit up. She slipped off the table and stumbled towards the door. Peering through the crack, she saw the man moving down the hallway, his attention focused on the intruder. Taking a deep breath, Emily crept out of the room and bolted in the opposite direction. She didn't know where she was going. She just needed to get out. She found herself in the living room again. The front door was in sight, but she knew she had to be careful. The man could return at any moment. Then she saw it. The back door, slightly ajar. Without thinking, she dashed towards it, flung it open, and ran into the night. The cold air burned her lungs as she sprinted down the hill, not daring to look back. She could hear footsteps behind her, getting closer, but she kept running, her fear driving her forward. She reached the main road just as headlights appeared in the distance. Desperate, she waved her arms, screaming for help. The car screeched to a halt, and the driver jumped out, a young woman who looked as terrified as Emily felt. "Please help me!" Emily gasped, collapsing by the side of the road. The woman quickly helped her into the car and sped off, leaving the villa and its horrors behind. The police arrived within minutes, but it was too late. Jack, Sarah, and Mike were gone. The villa was empty, and the man had vanished without a trace. It wasn't until days later that Emily learned the truth. The villa's owner was a notorious serial killer, one the police had been hunting for years. He lured his victims to the villa with promises of luxury and isolation,
only to harvest their organs and dispose of their bodies in the nearby woods.
Emily was the only one who had ever escaped, but she would never forget the dead eyes of the man who had taken her friends. Every time she closed her eyes, she could still see them, staring back at her from the darkness. And though she had survived, she knew that part of her would always remain in that villa on the hill, haunted by the memories of that night.